Hello and welcome to the Narc Alert, the channel where we look at different YouTubers and celebrities and point out some traits that they seem to show that fall within the spectrum of narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. Please do not send any snark to our subjects. First of all, let me say very clearly once again, we are having a little messy fun. This is not a diagnosis. We're simply going to point out some traits that this YouTuber shows us that seem similar to traits that fall within NPD. So key points to remember: messy fun and not a diagnosis. Our story tonight features one of Canada's most notorious criminals, Paul Bernardo. It's timely. Paul recently had his second parole hearing. I also know a lot of my viewers are younger and not Canadian, so this case might be new for some of you. But it was huge, so I'm guessing a good deal of you will know all about it. I want to look at the man today, but we can't do that without looking back to see how we got here. This case is kind of personal. It took place very close to my home, over the late 80s and early 90s in various cities around Toronto where I was working as a pastry chef. Once the case went to trial, they placed a publication ban on much of the information, so the newspapers couldn't report the trial transcripts until a day or two late. There was no video, pictures, or court TV. Every day I would sit down for lunch and read the 3 big daily newspapers in our city. They had multiple pages of coverage of this horror show. I'd return to work with my head full, and I would finish my shift in silent contemplation. It was all too much. Paul Bernardo started his career as the Scarborough Rapist. Scarborough was at the time a suburb to the east of Toronto. I was a downtown girl and never went to the burbs, but we all heard all about it, and we were all aware every time we went out. Between May 1987 and May 1990, Bernardo was responsible for almost 20 incidents of sexual assault, mostly attacking women as they got off buses in the dark neighborhoods of Scarborough. Paul met Karla in 1987. Karla was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed schoolgirl from St. Catharines who fell immediately for Paul. They eventually moved in with Karla's family. By 1990, Paul and Karla were engaged. Karla worked in a veterinarian's office, which came in handy for her to steal the drugs to drug her sister Tammy, who was 15, to allow Paul to assault her as a Christmas present. Paul resented the fact that Karla wasn't a virgin when they met and always had a little thing for Tammy. With the girl's parents asleep upstairs, they filmed the attack of her little sister.
Alright, wait, what are you drinking there?
Ice.
Ice? Ice, baby, to go?
No.
Okay, let's see what's up. We have the television and we have Karla drinking and Lori, which is absolutely not drinking.
She was given too much Valium and knocked out with a rag of halothane, and eventually led to her death. After Tammy's death, they took to making porn videos of Karla dressed up in her little sister's clothing, and eventually moved into their own house in Port Dalhousie. In June, Leslie Mahaffey, 14, happened to be on the street late at night when Bernardo happened by. She'd been attending a friend's wake, and she missed her curfew. Her mum, fed up with the teenager's persistent lateness, locked her out of the house. She was on her way to a friend's when Bernardo approached her. She asked him for a cigarette, and that was about it. Paul and Karla, as usual, taped themselves torturing and sexually abusing Leslie. At one point, Bernardo said, "You're doing a good job, Leslie, a damned good job," adding, "The next 2 hours are going to determine what I do to you. Right now, you're scoring perfect." These tapes were played at the trial, but shown only to the jury. But the transcripts told a story of hours and hours of horrendous, sadistic abuse. I'm not going into it. It's nothing that anyone needs to hear. Paul said the next day Karla fed Leslie a lethal dose of halcyon. Karla claimed that Bernardo strangled her. They put her body in the basement. They had no time to dispose of her as they were hosting a dinner party with Karla's parents that night. After dinner, Paul and Karla decided to dismember her and encased the parts of her body in cement. They dumped the blocks in a lake nearby. But one of the blocks was just too heavy, and it ended up on the shore, to be later discovered by fishermen. Leslie Mahaffey was discovered on the day that Paul and Karla held their fairy tale wedding. In April, Paul and Karla were cruising around after school hours looking for their next victim. They spotted Kristen French. Karla popped out of the car pretending to be lost, with a map asking for help. When Kristen looked at the map, Paul attacked her from behind and they dragged her into the car. It was Easter weekend, and the pair once again taped themselves torturing, raping, and sodomizing poor Kristen French. The following day, she was murdered before they went to Karla's parents for Easter dinner. Karla testified that Bernardo strangled her for 7 minutes while she watched. Paul said Karla beat her with a rubber mallet. Regardless, when it was over, Karla just went to fix her hair. Kristen's body was found in a ditch, naked and bathed, with her hair cut off. Things were growing tense, and Paul had begun to beat Karla more often. He beat her so badly that she ended up at the police station and eventually turned on him. She used the battered wife defense, and the case went to trial. It ended with what is known in Canada as the deal with the devil, when Karla turned on Paul and testified against him, resulting in a very light sentence for herself.
It was great. It was really good. It was pretty well the same all the way through, except we became emotionally closer.
Everyone at the time was the fact that Paul had hidden all the videotapes of the crimes, starring both him and Karla, in a false ceiling in their house. These tapes were discovered after his conviction due to Karla's testimony, and the truth of her crimes became evident. Her deal could not be overturned, and she ended up being sentenced to 12 years for manslaughter, while Paul Bernardo was sentenced to life imprisonment and later declared a dangerous offender. In Canada, this designation carries an automatic sentence of imprisonment for an indeterminate period, with no chance of parole for 7 years. Karla was playing the battered woman, and in the beginning, some bought her act. It is what got her the amazing deal that she ended up with. In truth, she is about as narcissistic as Paul. She was extremely jealous of other women, and especially Tammy. Many think that she killed Tammy on purpose. After Tammy's death, in the weeks leading up to their wedding, Karla was known to complain about her parents being sad all the time and not wanting to spend more on her wedding. She accused her father of wallowing in his own misery, rather than paying for her expensive wedding. In a letter written after Tammy's funeral, Karla denounced her father for leaving her and Bernardo to pay $5,000 to $6,000 of their own money for their elaborate wedding in June. She wrote to her friend, "My father doesn't even want us to have a wedding anymore. He thinks we should go to City Hall. Screw that, we're having a good time. If he wants to sit at home and be miserable, he's welcome to. He hasn't worked except for 1 day since Tammy died. He's wallowing in his own misery." Tammy wanted a car for her 16th birthday. Even this was an issue for Karla. "Now my father keeps saying, I would have bought it for her if only I'd known. That's bull. If he really felt like that, then he'd be paying for my wedding, because I could die tomorrow or next year or whenever. He is such a liar." Karla's narcissism is on full display in this short, grainy clip of Karla taking investigators on a tour of the crime scene, their house in Port Dalhousie.
Any of the furniture damaged as a result of the investigation?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, good, so I'm asking for it.
And upstairs in the bathroom where they cleansed Kristen French's body of evidence, Homolka inquired after her perfume samples.
But I don't have any of that stuff.
So where are all those articles from?
Where Paul's lawyer took them.
You're saying Paul's lawyer took a number of articles from you?
Well, from what I understand, his lawyer took basically everything. This is where we carried Leslie down the stairs.
And in the basement where Leslie Mahaffey was dismembered, she had yet another inquiry on behalf of her other sister, Lori.
Can I ask you a question?
I'm afraid I can't answer
Can I
you.
have that book? My sister wants it. Or does that have to stay here?
That has to stay for now,
Okay.
but we can make those arrangements.
Okay, thank you. And my Christmas tree.
There are many more horrendous details about this case, and if you're interested, I encourage you to look it up. Karla was released in 2005, and she's now married and has children of her own. Paul has been in prison since 1995, but was eligible for his first parole hearing in 2018. He was denied. This year, in 2021, he had his second parole hearing. No one aside from Paul and his lawyer advocated for this hearing. According to his parole officer, Paul has made no progress since his last hearing in 2018, where he was found to pose an undue risk to society. The officer said Bernardo is still a high-risk sex offender who isn't a good candidate for release. When time came for him to speak, he gave a rambling statement, full of run-on sentences and misused words. He called his previous self a male chauvinist pig who viewed women, especially virgins, as sex objects meant to obey his every command. He admitted to lying under oath in his 1995 trial and denied killing Kristen and Leslie. He said it was in response to Karla's deal. Now he sincerely apologizes for putting their families through the sickening and horrifying ordeal of watching the videotapes he'd recorded of their rape and torture. He said he was not a sexual sadist, but the torture and pain he caused was punishment for the girls disobeying him. He spoke about how Kristen French's defiance led to her punishment, while her mother sat and had to listen to him. Bernardo said getting caught was the best thing that ever happened to me. Now he could get the help he needed. He told the board that he daily does the work of self-management. He prays. He practices mindfulness. He no longer indulges in fantasies or masturbates. He no longer objectifies women. Typically narcissistic, he has not taken even a single institutional program since his last parole bid. He does his own routine, and of course he excels at it. He's achieved an extraordinary level of restraint. He has become a pillar of virtue. He stated that despite the side effects, he is even willing to take medication to drive down his sex drive for the sake of public safety. Always the martyr, he suggested that despite wanting to move to an Ontario halfway house to be near his parents as a sacrifice for his victims, he's willing to move across the country to BC, where he will even take a menial job, like picking fruit. The board asked him if he thought he posed a risk. Bernardo answered, "Without a doubt I'm low risk because I've stopped all sexual deviant behavior." The parole board countered with the question, "Isn't it rather easy to control your sexual violence against women when you've been locked up for 28 years? No, Bernardo stated he's now an empathetic changed man. Oh, another empath. The last parole hearing, I cried almost the whole time. I have a lot of empathy for what I did. Paul, of course, saves the greatest empathy for himself. He claims he's suffered cruel and unusual punishment because he's been kept in segregation. He forgets to mention that this is for his own personal safety. He would get killed in Gen Pop, without a doubt. Bernardo showed no emotion Wednesday when he was told his applications for both day and full parole were denied. The board's decision was quick. It took 30 minutes, which was a relief for the families of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. They had to endure a whole day, locked in a small hearing room at the Millhaven Institution with Bernardo, the man who videotaped himself raping and torturing their daughters, sitting there on the screen in front of them. So, there's our Canadian justice system at about its worst. The deal with Karla, the farce of the parole hearing that the families have to endure every 2 years, at least it is safe to say he will never get out. Thanks for joining me for another True Crime Sunday story. We will be back tomorrow with a Retro Amber. Please take a moment to click like and leave a comment, maybe even subscribe. Now go. Be kind. Hasta luego.